For the next 25 minutes, G. Edward Griffin, one of the icons of the Patriot movement, best-selling author of The Creature from Jekyll Island, the new movie coming out in just about, 7 days, shipping from Infowars.com. What in the world are they spraying? A gentleman who has just produced countless films, one of the icons in building the framework and the platform to defeat the globalist, G. Edward Griffin. G. Edward, I've got you on. I didn't talk to you before you came on. We thought to have you on tonight. Just called you a few hours ago. We appreciate you on in short notice. But what is your view of alternative media and the Infowars.com platform, and do you think it's worthy of people financially supporting it?
Oh, Alex, that's such an easy question to answer. It's the only way that we have any hope of doing an end run around this information block, this barrier. You know, everyone knows this, but I think it's good once in a while to remind ourselves that people are like computers. The brains that we have are, completely blank when we're born. We've got certain connections and we're capable of thought, but we don't really start to think until we have words put in there, and then we have patterns of words and experiences and so forth. And gradually we become programmed. Our brains become programmed with human experiences and information and education. And, the old saying is garbage in, garbage out is so true with the human brain. I don't care how smart you are or how well wired up you are, what your IQ is. If you don't have access to accurate information, it is impossible for you to come up with correct conclusions or solutions to problems. So when we've got an information barrier, as I think everybody listening to this show certainly knows, I don't care how smart you are, it's impossible to really know what's going on in the world. So we've always had this problem. How do we get around, do an end run around this mass media block of information? Well, so what you're doing in the alternative media is the solution. It's why these guys at the top are scared to death that somehow they won't be able to control this. And I think they stay up. They're probably listening tonight figuring out, how can we stop this? How can we stop this? We must stop this soon. Because they know that their lies, their disinformation, their half-truths are being exposed. So to answer your question in a short form, it's the only way we ever hope to unite our people based on solid information and positive goals. So God bless you for that.
Well, God bless you, G. Edward Griffin. I mean, if we look at this, for decades they said no world government existed. I mean, Limbaugh 15 years ago said the CFR didn't even exist. There's no carbon tax. Just 2 years ago, they used the fake right wing to suppress people, and the left out promoting their communism, collectivism as the other side of the equation and their controlled paradigm. Now it's all out in the open. We've been vindicated, verified. We didn't care if we got made fun of. You didn't care 45 years ago. I didn't care 15 years ago. And now we've got incredible credibility, and we know these are just men we're fighting. They're not invincible. And the mortgages are being suspended. Everything we talked about with the devaluation of the dollar, the Federal Reserve announcing that they're going to hyperinflate. That is such an incredible announcement. I'm going to give you the floor. And the only way I can do this, being an obnoxious person, is I'm going to give you 10 minutes, G. Edward Griffin, right now. And I'm going to turn the mic off. I'm going to walk in the control room as a watcher, as a listener. And I'm going to listen to you talk about what's happening currently in the crossroads we're at and where you see this society going. Then I'm going to come back and talk about some other issues. But for the next 10 minutes, we only got 21 minutes left with you. G. Edward Griffin is our guest, live, uninterrupted, part of the InfoWarsMoneyBomb.com transmission. G. Edward Griffin, talk about, I mean, it's one thing for you and I to intellectually know this and know their plans and read the documents, but what is it like for you every day to wake up and see it all unfolding? We're now at that point, and they're not having the victories that they said they would have. They're seeing opposition mount, and at least in my view. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, I certainly am not going to try to correct you because I think you're right. But by the way, I think I know what your trick is. You're going to go take a 10-minute nap, and I don't blame you.
No, I'm not. I'm going to go out there and sit and watch you, because if I sit here at this microphone, I'm going to interrupt you obnoxiously.
Oh, okay. I was just kidding. But anyway, I think I would if I were in your case. Anyway, thanks for giving me the floor for a few minutes. I should have known I was coming and should have prepared, but what the heck? All I got to do is just think for a minute. Where are we now? Where are we headed? I was talking with a group of people in San Francisco last week. I was attending a conference there, and there was this very nice young lady that happened to sit next to me at the dinner table, and she said, "Well, how do you know what's going to happen in the future? How can you predict?" And everybody was saying that I had done a fairly good job of predicting things in the financial world, because when I published The Creature from Jekyll Island, the first printing was 1994, and I had just about everything that has happened and unfolded in recent years was predicted in that book. And so people thought, well, I've got some kind of a power of clairvoyancy or a crystal ball or something. And so she said, how can you predict these things so accurately? So I just had to explain to her something which was so simple and obvious to me, but not to her. And that is that, well, we know where we are now, but that doesn't tell us where we're headed, because if we're like in the center of a wheel, like if we're the hub of a wheel, heck, we could go in any direction in 360 degrees around that wheel. We don't know where we're headed until we go backward in time. Now, if we just are concerned with where we are now and where we're going, we don't know anything. But if we go back in time, and if we're willing to look at a little bit of history and see where we have been, now we can draw a straight line between some point in the past and where we are now, and now we've got an axis. Now we can say with all accuracy, if we just continue to do what we're doing, and without any substantial changes, we're going to continue going in the direction we're going. So that's pretty simple when you think about it. I became aware of political and economic issues for the first time in my life after I was married, after I was already working in the corporate world. I was climbing the corporate ladder, or so I thought. I thought that was the thing I had to do, make some money, live in a nice house, have a great wife and a couple of kids and a station wagon and a dog and all of the sort of things that we get, focused on when we're young and don't know any better. Not that any of those things are bad. It's just that there are other things in life. And that's what I was doing. So it was back in 1959 and 1960 before I began to look around and realize that, what the heck, things weren't really what I thought they were. And I began to look beneath the surface. And that was for the first time that I really began to take a look backward in time. Not in terms of the history books that I had to go through when I was in school. It's not in the sense of remembering a bunch of dates. There was the date of the Boer War, and what was the date of the American Civil War, and what was the city, and who were the names of the conquerors and those things. No, what I began to discover was the human element, the human motivation, the hidden agendas. I discovered that most of history is driven by the engine of conspiracy. Well, I wasn't really focused on that word conspiracy in those days. I didn't realize back in 1960 that you weren't supposed to think of conspiracies because that's supposed to make you a kook. None of that was out there yet. But I did discover that, my gosh, when you look at every major event in history, there were a couple of conspiracies involved. So I began to accept that idea without any problem. And the question then became, well, what drove these conspiracies? What was the motivation? What were the counterforces? What was to be gained? Who was the winner and who was the loser? And then I began to realize that the history books that I had been reading generally were written by the winners. I thought, oh, that's interesting. Maybe the history I was learning wasn't entirely accurate. I found out to some extent that is true. They're always written by the winners. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that my mind gradually was opened to a different kind of tableau, a different kind of understanding of history. And I began to realize that there were certain lines that came directly to where I was standing in the present being 1960, and I could see that we were headed right toward a condition in which all the freedoms and all the lifestyle and all the affluence which we were enjoying in the 1960s was being attacked. It was the enemy. There were people in powerful positions who were doing their best, even then, in fact, long before then, to get rid of that they were trying to create a global system which they now call the New World Order, but in those days that word wasn't, or that phrase wasn't very popular. But they were talking about world government, and they were talking about what kind of world government. They were talking about the need to control everything at the top, to have a system which is what we call collectivism, the kind of a system in which the masses are told what to do by the very wise leaders at the top, not the kind of system that we had in America, where the people were in charge and they elected their representatives to be their servants. No, they had to get rid of that, they said, because that was inefficient. That wouldn't work. That would lead to wars. That would lead to all kinds of bad things. People would be selfish. There'd be famine. There'd be hunger. There'd be wars and so forth. So they were going to change all that by putting the world under a collectivist system. But I started to read this stuff, and in many cases it was coming directly from the source of the planners themselves. It wasn't just somebody writing about what they discovered or what they thought there was in history. This was something written by the partakers in this themselves. I remember running across a couple of books by Harold Lamb, who was a historian that lived in the Beverly Hills area, as I recall. And he wrote some books about Tamerlane, Timur the Lame, one of the practically a contemporary of Genghis Khan from that area of the world. One of the people who changed history in Asia, a conqueror of tremendous intelligence and cunning. In fact, some of the moves, I believe, that we use in the game of chess were actually based upon war strategies of Tamerlane. And I read the book by Harold Lamb about Tamerlane, another one he wrote on Theodora and the Emperor, Theodora being the queen of the last emperor of Rome. As I recall, it was Justinian, who was a little meek, measly guy, and she took over and ran the empire in its final days. And it was amazingly that she was a prostitute, and she came from the Colosseum. She was one of the common prostitutes that the emperor took a liking to and brought her to the palace. But she was so strong-willed and so intelligent, it didn't take long before everybody in the court was coming to her for decisions and directions, and she rapidly became the queen or the empress of Rome. I didn't know any of that. Man, if they had told me these things when I was in high school, I would have had an interest in history, but I didn't know any of that. So the point I'm leading to is that with the writings of Harold Lamb, for the first time, I was able to read in the words of the participants themselves